Hello and welcome. Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate you joining me. If you have been clicking along the internet and found yourself somewhere, somehow enjoying this conversation, well, it's one of those things that can happen out of the blue, much like the story that we're going to be talking about. I've been talking Will Eisner all week because, hey, it's Will Eisner week. And it's been a lot of fun to share my conversation with Matt B. Lloyd, to talk with the comic book shop owner, John Hitchcock, and you've seen that series up on here so far. Now I am lucky enough to sit down with, I believe he might be a master of comics. If not, I will definitely say he's an aficionado, and I've always enjoyed the passion that aficionados always bring. Josh Raynor, how you doing, man? Thanks for hopping in.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to get down here and just talk. Yeah.
Yeah, so am I. And I love the book that you picked. You know, I've been so focused a lot on the two that always seem to be the biggest names when it comes to Will Eisner. People love to say Contract with God and The Spirit. And those are two, you know, I mean, when people say that, it's really simple to identify him by those two things. But you brought up this great idea of what about life on another planet? And it's been on my list, and now I had the chance, and Josh has been so amazing helping me get this set up while I ran into technical difficulties. But thankfully, he's already, dialed in, as they might say, and was able to get us set up, man. So out of curiosity, was there any particular reason why Life on Another Planet, was the one that you chose? Had you read it before? Was there
I had never read it before, which is why I wanted to pick something I hadn't read before. Nice. And I was just kind of looking through what was available, what I could find, and the premise sounded really interesting to me. I was like, if I can find this to read it, you know what? Then I think this is the one I want to do. And luckily, I was able to find it.
Well, I'm really grateful you did too, because I have never actually read this one myself, and it was one of those stories that, as soon as I thought about it, well, for starters, we dropped this into a channel because Matt B. Lloyd is someone we're lucky enough to chat with on a regular basis. And when this title was brought up, he immediately said, also a signal from space, which has been messing my head up ever since then. But that's
I'm curious where it's called that, because in the physical book, in the pages that Life on Another Planet is drawn into it, like the lettering is drawn into it,
right?
So I'm curious where it's called that, and if they did some altered the artwork on those chapter pages for where it literally says that, or if they only just made another cover or something, or what they did with it. I'm curious.
I'm not sure. I mean, one of the things that I always kind of get a kick out of when it comes to Eisner is that it's not like he was ever afraid of doing the work.
Yeah.
So I could easily see him going, yeah, I wrote this one way and now I'm going to write it another way. Oh, and I wrote it 6 other ways just in case. And then I drew them all. Yeah. And then I drew copies and then I improved those. And you're just seriously, take the lead out of your fingertips, stop doing that. But, I everything that I heard when I was talking with Matt, with John Hitchcock, it seemed like that was one of the things that he prided himself on. He wasn't the fastest, but he got it done because he was just relentless, this whole idea. So I almost feel like the legend could support the idea that he wrote it, drew it 6 different ways and said, so what do you think? My main one is maybe this whole A Signal from Space. And then someone else was like, I like Life on Another Planet. It has something to it.
I know, right?
But essentially, the book starts out with A Signal from Space, so I could see that as a working title. I think that's
absolutely,
that I get a kick out of. Now, before we get really into this, do you want to provide anyone watching a sense of your experience with comics, Will Eisner, or anything else like that before we just dive into the actual content?
I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't read a lot of Will Eisner stuff. I think the most of his stuff that I've read is The Spirit, is some of the volumes of that. Contract with God, I hadn't read that. at all. So with you guys doing it, I definitely added it to my list of stuff to read. I was like, you know what? I guess I got to read this one now too.
Got to keep up, right? Keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah, absolutely. But like the history of Will Eisner is something that I've known about for years, and his influence on the comics industry. Obviously, for some reason, I just never came across many of his works, unfortunately. But as for me within comics, I mean, when I was a kid, I read kind of the kiddie type comics. I didn't really get into superhero comics until I was in high school. Before that, it was like Looney Tunes comics and the Simpsons comics and things like that. I remember I had a beat up, like really worn up, I think I still have it though, copy of issue 1 of Cowboys of Moo Mesa. I don't even think they did any. I don't even know if they did any other issues, to be honest with you.
I'm not sure either.
It's based on a TV show, animated series. So I had that, and I had a copy of the Pirates of Darkwater, which was another animated series that they did a comic for. And I think I still have them, but I read them so many times. A couple, like I said, a couple issues of The Simpsons, a couple issues of Looney Tunes. That's where I started. And then in high school, we had this newsstand around the corner from where me and my mom did laundry every week, and they had a spinner rack. You're nice. Familiar with spinner racks, but
I am.
And I went in there. I was just looking at stuff, and I came across, I believe it was Green Lantern issue 145. It's Kyle Raynor. It's the issue where on the cover it looks like a tsunami, and it's got in the water, like it's all green in the water. It says Green Lantern, and for some reason that image caught my eye, and so I picked it up and I was flipping through it and I decided to buy it. And so that was my very first superhero book, and it's what I fell in love with Green Lantern right then and there, with Kyle Raynor and everything, and ever since then I've just been hooked. Buying comics ever since. I think I was, I don't know, maybe 18, 19 or something like that. I think I was like right at the end into high school, maybe even, I might have even been in college. I'm not even sure. I was late to the superhero game when it came to comics. My superhero stuff started with Batman the Animated Series. But I didn't get into comics until superhero comics until much later in life.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Mine was, I had a friend who had comics, and he sort of he would bring them to school and show me. And I'm like, we're at a private school, because my mom worked at a private school, but they wouldn't give her a raise, but they offered her free tuition for me and my sister. So she was like, guess what? I'm getting paid one way or another. You're going to this private school for like a year or two. And he was this cool guy whose name happened to be Josh as well. And he then, for my birthday, got me Flash number 49, which is the one where Vandal Savage shoots Wally West in a race across the sand with the energy leaching panels underneath him. And I was like, what a dirty dog, because number 49 ends with killing the Flash. I'm like, how do I not find the next one? I even told him, I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? And he's like, dude, the Flash is alive in number 50. You got to get number 50. And of course, I then have to discover that there's a comic book shop that I can actually find these things. And after that, I discovered Will Eisner because I was in the library. Didn't have enough money to buy any comics, but I had found a whole collection of books about history of comics and things like that. And while reading through it, I was like, so who's this guy who draws these really interesting people that kind of look lifelike and almost feel Disney, but not really? And
yeah,
it was a really great exposure. And now, just every time I uncover something and you realize how much he's done, this week became more interesting for me. Last year, I got to interview Danny Fingeroth, who's a former Marvel writer, and now is the chair of the Will Eisner and Will Eisner Week committee. Nice. Yeah, and great guy, sweetheart. Just let me just ramble along with him forever. And this became something that I wanted to come back to. So I was great that I've had a chance to hang out with Matt so far and John. And I was really grateful when you were down to, hop on this week and talk about this book. So, neither of us have read it before. Yet at the same time, we've seen this concept, which essentially, to give you a really brief idea, there's a signal from space, and it says that there is life on a planet only 10 years away that's, named Bernard, of all places, or Barnard. Your choice, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah,
but
it's literally written both ways throughout the book. Right. I kind of love that.
That really got my interest. Yeah, it depends on who's saying it and who they're saying it to. But then this race begins, because it's also keeping in mind that when the story is being told, it's still the Cold War era. There is still a lot of tension between the U.S. and the then Soviet Union. And if there's one thing that's still being talked about now with concepts like Space Force, is the idea of who will actually take charge of our venture into space, and what will be the motives behind that. Wealth, power, territory, or some other mission. And what's interesting is this signal from space kind of kickstarts a set of dominoes that all go off in different directions, but because they're dominoes, they're still so well tied together. Their moves influence everything else. And we get to see all of the possibilities and all the motives for supporting or denying the idea of making contact and maybe even journey to another planet. Set that up for us pretty well?
Oh, yeah, I think so. So there's so much more to it, too, and that's what's crazy about it. So much wild stuff going on.
I'd say what was probably the one thing, when you're done reading this and you have a chance to actually kind of pause for a second, was there this is what really stuck out for me. This was a lingering, experience, thought, feeling when I was done reading this. And we'll sort of use that to open up the rest of the book.
I mean, really, the feeling that I had at the end was just how kind of scarily accurate I feel like it would be if something like this happened, with these different nations fighting to be the first up there, nobody wanting to listen. I mean, you've got a crazy cult going on, which would 100% happen nowadays, especially in the political climate we have now. You've got assassinations going on. I mean, it's insanity, but it all felt like this would absolutely happen. And it's kind of a scary thought to think about. And because you don't actually know if it's anything. That's the problem. You don't ever find out really if what that signal was actually anything.
Because it repeats a few times, right? And then it's gone. There's no other evidence for a long period of time throughout the book, but it's enough to get things moving.
Yeah. It could all be happening for literally nothing.
Right. All for the glint, the possibility, right?
Yeah.
Even the conjecture at most. And because of that, it's interesting for us reading it to try at some point to remember all that. Because if you keep following the story, everyone else believes it. And if there's one thing that Eisner, I think, really does well, and it was something that John Hitchcock was talking about, Danny Fingeroth was talking about, the idea that his understanding of story and how to make it so captivating was one of his best strengths. He knew exactly what pulled you in. And at a certain point in this, I would stop and be like, yeah, they still don't know any of this is real, but everybody believes it is. And they're so compelled to act the way they do that you have to buy into it to a degree, because you realize how quickly it is for an idea to become something transformative, life-changing, world-altering. And as you mentioned, we have a crazy cast of characters that showcase that for us.
Yeah. And it just gets crazier as it goes on.
So I think probably the one thing that stuck out for me the most was the character of Mr. Blood, who I think has probably one of the best names in comics that I can think of right now. It's not spelled B-L-O-O-D.
I wonder if it's actually supposed to be pronounced that way, because there are times in the book where it is spelled B-L-O-O-D, like a character says it that way. And so I'm wondering, did Will Eisner misspell it on those occasions, or is it pronounced blood? And then those people are just like with the Bernard thing, you know. Like, I'm curious if he did it intentionally to show that people pronounce these certain things differently, or if it was just him missing his own editing. I don't know.
No, that's a good question. I do feel at times the pronunciation was based on who the speaker was. And if it was someone who had an accent based on location or commanded the English language, and that was going to influence. But it also felt like something where you could say it, blood, and probably be pretty close. But I also got a kick out of the fact that it, when I first read it, I was like, oh, this is ominous. That's a ominous name for this gentleman.
Yeah, I know, right?
And he seems to, like blood, sort of be everywhere. It's like, if this is an organism, he's that piece of it that touches everything. He seems to come in contact with just about everyone. And I felt like, for the most part, he was our eyes. He was our window. We saw some scenes in which he didn't occur, but in many ways, he was sort of the character that we most connected with, or at least I did when I was reading. I was wondering if you felt the same way, or if you had a connection with any other. Yeah.
Oh yeah. He was definitely the one that I feel like I connected the most with, because almost every other character in this book, they're not very good people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Will Eisner has no problem showing people as being not as good as you want them to be, and probably a little worse than you'd like. And he's like, isn't it a shame? And I think the other thing that sticks with me is that with a lot of the characters, they don't seem as dangerous as they are. There's an early appearance. So the concept is the idea of a signal from space. And then from that, all these different reactions. One reaction is a drunk named Marco, who is a writer and clearly not very successful, or struggling with inner demons or challenges that have led to alcoholism. But he's moved by the announcement and wanders down to a cocktail waitress and says, oh, yeah, I've got it all figured out. She sees his notes by helping him upstairs, and the star people are born. Like a prophetic Moses-like character is like, I have writings and teachings. Come with me, my people. I'm ready to show you the way. And from that, we get a religious movement, which I love that you said, a cult could happen right now in this time.
I mean, it's essentially already happening with the whole Q thing. And so I feel like it could easily happen with something like this.
It wouldn't be too far of a stretch for us now to say that this announcement happened in present day, and see just how quickly current tensions and motivations about space would probably be very similar to what's described in this book. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I love that there are characters who look at the star people because he gets a small crew. And for the most part, they're in it because there's booze, or they think there will be, and that's good enough for them. But others see the opportunity in a movement, that if you back it financially, it could lead to opportunities down the road. Religious movement offers a certain degree of freedoms, which might provide sanctuary when things aren't as comfortable in one country, but another country that can benefit from whatever you're doing will provide religious sanctuary. And it's really hard to argue that when religious freedoms are involved. So I felt like that was a really interesting statement on that idea, but also a great sort of driving force as part of one of the plots moving this story forward. And then as we do, we also get to see all the machine parts moving around them that see them as either an advantage or not. And we get the multinational idea, which is something that I feel like I've grown up with hearing and knowing is like a concept, whether it's something that can be proven or not, depending on who you talk to. That's a loaded conversation. But the idea of those who say they're acting in the better interests of the world and not for any one country or another, it seems like they're moving a lot of chess pieces. Eisner brought up this idea when he did, at a time when I feel it was still very new, and yet he's describing it about as completely as I've experienced it described by anyone else up till now. Any thoughts on your part on the fact that every time the multinational made a move, it seemed exactly like what they should be doing and the most terrifying decision that you can make when it comes to deciding a global future?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of this multinational thing, like you said, I feel like it easily could be something that's happening. I mean, over the years that I've been alive, you always hear stories about, cabals of powerful people who are running the world essentially. I mean, it's gone back to like all the way back to like the Knights Templar and things like that. Probably before that, these mysterious groups. I mean, like the Illuminati and things. That's essentially what this is. It's this group of powerful people behind the scenes controlling everything. And the fact that, what is this, 1973 or so? I think, is that when this book came out?
I think so.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking 50 years ago, Will Eisner's over here dropping these bombs like he's in present day. This guy was ahead of his time in so many ways. And it's scary, the ideas that he had in his head that just ring true even today. It's just how easily I could believe that something like this was happening right now in 2021.
Well, I think also because of the players that he brings in, they all seem like they fit. We have a rogue nation that has a despot leader who's financially in ruin and sees this new discovery as an opportunity to declare secession from the world, and now as a representative of a new planet, or at least in collaboration in some way, like basically saying I have diplomatic immunity from the world because I'm now actually connected in some way to this other world. And his way of doing that is to offer the Star People a place to come, a place to be. And this is also important because the Star People, meanwhile, are also being approached by the multinationals who are saying, how about if we could help you get to this planet, find a way there?
Yeah.
It's not cheap, costs money, and we've got money. We believe in your cause. So how about we partner? And it's actually through that partnership, that first sort of introduction, that we see a character who doesn't appear physically imposing, but very quickly recognizes that someone knows who he is and says, hey, I feel like you're, someone I've seen before and that you're some kind of a spy. So out the window, gets rid of his one dissenter. I was stunned by how swift the violence was. I think it was 2 panels, very quickly, like, here, come here, I'm sorry. And then done, right out the window, and he sells it. And very quickly, there is now financial backing for a journey to the planet Bernard, which is then also part of this rogue dictator in a country called, the spelling, I'm not going to be 100. It's like
in my head, I was just for simplicity, I just pronounced it Sidami. I don't know if that, because there's an extra I in the middle, so I was like, right. I don't know if it's Sidiami, but because I kept getting tripped up on it in my head as I was reading it, so I'm just like, I'm calling it Sidami, and I'm moving on.
And that is a good suggestion for anyone else. Sidami, and you're right there, right? So now Sidami has not only the religious movement of the Star People, but also their funding to set up a launch plan and send a vehicle up into space that will hopefully make contact. And through that, we also get another player, which is a scientist who is going to die soon and knows it, and reaches out to 2 other scientists. And from that, we have this idea of blending human DNA with plant cell tissue and creating a new organism that would be our best ambassador to the planet Bernard.
Which I found
interesting idea.
Yeah, right? Because what I found interesting, because we see this plant being later on, like we really actually see it, and it's people are interacting with it, but it's just a plant. Like, it's not like this plant talks. It's not like it's in the shape of a person. It's literally a potted plant. So I'm curious, like, how would it actually, like, what would it actually do out in space? Like, you know, if it lands on this planet, what does it do? Does it grow into a person? Like, you know what I mean? Like, they don't really answer fully what happens with this plant person. I'll be honest. I was really intrigued about this plant thing. I really wanted to know more about it.
Well, I think the thing that kind of stuck with me first about it was the ideas introduced. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this sounds like technology we might be able to employ now. But he's suggesting it at the time, which I thought was a really interesting advancement, but also shows how this is something that, you know, people have considered for a while. There have been forms of animal and human cellular relationships, the idea of an artificial heart or artificial organs that can be harvested from an animal and used in a human being. And then I thought what was really interesting is that this idea was introduced with that document. You know, first is the conjecture on the part of the scientists and the theory, followed by this group that's there to discuss it and what it means. And then there was this really interesting decision to have that long text document, the Baxter study. You know, essentially someone who worked for the CIA, understood how the electrodes that are used for a lie detector can detect different emotions. And then how this like innocent discovery of registering water intake by a plant recognizes that plants actually experience emotions. And so when we meet this plant creature later, it's never actually, as you said, described how it is that it's going to communicate. But there is a foundation for the ideas that they think they can extract from the information it shares with them. The document talks about things like the plant knew that there was a scientist who killed all his plants after a different study. And when that, you know, scientist walked into the room, the plants would like freeze in horror or, you know, lock up in some sort of emotional reaction and then relax as soon as she left. And then so many other examples of communication or expression and feeling on the part of the plant, which I thought was a really interesting basis. And I was surprised, like you, that they didn't go further into it. Like, this is a device that can read what those things mean, or this is how we can interpret what its emotions are. Given that they didn't, what did you think about this rudimentary approach to an organism that's supposed to be landing on the planet for us, telling us information about the planet, and we haven't even been given a key as to how we're supposed to interpret that information? Did it leave you with questions, or did you start extrapolating on your own? Like,
I mean, it definitely left me with questions because, like, like I said, I don't know what is supposed to happen. They said that it had like a 7-year incubation, and then it would be 3 years old by the time it got to the planet. But what does that mean? They don't actually tell you, okay, so if this plant being is 3 years old, is it still a potted plant? Does it have a brain? Can it talk? I had so many questions about that specific part. And then we get like the scenes where that, I don't remember her name, but the lady who's living with Rocco, and she's like, and she wants, because it's Vito is in the plant now. And and so like she's like in love with the plant. But it's like, is she getting anything out of this plant? I don't know. Because they don't ever, and it's like, I had so many questions about that. And like, I wasn't mad about it. I wanted more. Like, I really want to know more about this concept and idea. Like, I would read a whole graphic novel just on the concept of that, you know, and like where you could go with that as growing new organisms that way. And I also found it interesting that this Baxter thing was real. Because like I Google searched it, and it's a real thing. A real guy did these experiments. I was like, that's really cool. And he took something real like that, and then kind of expanded into this interesting science fiction realm that he went into with it.
I agree. And also, I mean, I couldn't help getting past the idea that media has such an influence on what we think we know about how things are done. So whenever I think of the lie detector guy, I think stone, uncaring, emotionless, mechanical in some ways, like someone who just like walks in and is like, everything about you is telling me something. I'm like Sherlock Holmes from the Netflix series, you know, I'm Benedict Cumberbatch, and everything about you tells me things you don't want me to know. And yet he seems to be this like conscientious, caring person who thinks about and studies the behavior and the feelings of plants. I just really got a kick out of that. I was like, I would read a book about that guy. You know what I mean? I would get a kick out of like, what is this guy thinking about or dreaming about when he's communicating with plants in this way? And I think the other thing is, what should be fun for anyone who hasn't read this or isn't familiar with it is the idea that Vito is a character at the beginning of everything that's happening who seems like a rare sort of slice of life occurrence. Another example of spousal distress, spousal abuse. And he ends up pulling a gun on his wife, who's a much bigger woman than he is. And after shooting her, finds asylum with the Star People, and then later in country of Sidion as their first volunteer, this pilot or slash test subject who's agreed to journey without really knowing what he's agreed to. He just knows if he stays, there's going to be trouble, and trouble eventually follows him because the mob, which he is connected to because of his marriage, has sent a hitman to finish off Vito. And that's where we get the chance to meet Rocco, who has interactions with Blood and a few other characters, but he's actually the one who ended up taking responsibility, I guess, for Vito, who has become a plant and really prevents him from completing his mission of being a hitman, because how do you prove you killed a plant? How do you prove the plant you killed is Vito?
Yeah, exactly. When that whole storyline started, when they went to the mob and all that and put the hit out on Vito, I was like, what is this? Where is this going? How, like, why is this part of the story? I didn't understand at first. And obviously it all makes sense as you keep reading. But when it first was happening, I was like, I don't understand where they're going with this. And I think that's one of the great things about Will Eisner is you don't necessarily know where he's going with everything, but he'll take you on that ride and he'll get you where you need to go.
He will, and he's going to do it in a way that's going to make you want to keep reading. Because there's a part of me that's fully aware of the fact that even right now, he's probably listening in and going, boys, who says you have to answer every question? Who says unanswered questions don't help the reader as much as answers? You know what I mean? Like, you know, I always love, there's this great quote from a West Wing episode, which is like one of my Bibles when it comes to referencing life, just because of how well it does things like that. And there's one where there's a poet laureate who's like, you think my job is to like show you truth? Yeah, you're missing it. My job is to capture your attention and hold it for as long as possible. And if I happen to find truth along the way, we both got lucky. But don't put on me what you think I should be doing when all I'm trying to do is get your attention with things that I think are important. Where they go from there, that's not my responsibility. My job as an artist is to get your attention and hold it as long as possible. So I had to reference back to that idea with this approach of there aren't always answers. And just because I'm telling you about things that I'm thinking about doesn't mean I think I've got answers too. And if I don't have them by the time the story is done, there's a strong chance I'm going to be authentic and leave them unanswered, because for me to be inauthentic, you know, disingenuous, and decide to instead, you know, create some, there, we put a bookend, we patted it down, story's done. Everybody's happy and you can feel good about it. That doesn't mean that I was being honest with you or me. And the honesty in this book is one of the things that I find interesting, because there's some moments of beauty and there's some really harsh, just ugly, like, people suck. You know, there's just some of those moments where you're like, people really suck. And
they do.
and the examples are different. Marco goes from being recovered, less of a drunk spiritual leader who's kind of like, you know, aware that he's being used and manipulating, but is kind of taken a more positive, at least, direction in his life than being just a drunk in his apartment, only to at some point lose the woman he cares about and right back downhill, find himself back in the place where he was, lonely, distraught, angry, and finding himself, essentially so forlorn that he starts again fabricating ideas about what he's being told and what he's interpreting it to mean. And now he's got a mass group of followers in the process who their biggest crime is they believe, they make the mistake of believing the wrong guy, and it ends up costing them. But he's just one tragic case. There's the woman who he's involved with, who starts as a cocktail waitress, becomes a supporter of this movement, and is a great example of what happens when we get a taste of a better life and what we're willing to sacrifice. If that better life means something we want, something more than what we have, or something else that the reader's left going, what are you doing? What?
Yeah.
You're going to do
it. They really took Cora on quite a journey, a deeper journey than I expected them to. I really didn't think she was going to play as big of a part as she did.
Neither did I. In fact, I sort of felt like there was at least one or two moments where I was expecting her end to come early. I was sort of flipping through the pages like, okay, really? Okay. Kid stays in the picture. All right. Yeah. Little Evans reference there. But the idea that, she ends up going on this journey where she does eventually get something close to what she wants. But along the way, she seems to pay a very painful price. And it's one of those questions where at the end of it, you find yourself, I did at least, going, is it worth it? Once you've gone through the things you did to get what you want, can you look back and say, yeah, I can still look at myself in the mirror? Or is it not everything you imagine it would be, or something less than what you had to go through to get it? Because when she finally reaches a place of power and is able to seem like someone important and influential, she doesn't seem very happy. She seems almost locked in another cycle, like she was in all the other examples leading up to her later success. It seems for her there's grass is always greener on the other side. Life is always better doing something else. Happiness is a temporary thing. And I was surprised that she lasted as long as she did. But then I was intrigued by the fact that one of the reasons she seemed to keep lasting is that was something about her that never really changed. She kept wanting better and more. And that's almost like one of the reasons her story kept going. She wasn't going to be stopped by anyone challenging her, anyone offering her a different path. I mean, Jonesy, I feel like even Blood, Marco, these were all people who were offering something different. And at some point, none of them were really enough for her. The closest, I think, that ends up being her final solution is a high-powered Washington type who, I mean, really, this is just his new younger wife. And if nothing else, is an example of him using his power to break a marriage and get what he wants, sort of an idea. But we also had some other characters that I was curious just to get your thoughts on, because we mentioned the idea of multinational. And what I loved is, sure, that's an Illuminati. But we also get this idea that doesn't mean there's only one Illuminati working in the world. For every MI6, there's a nemesis. There's a Spectre. There is, for every Justice League, there's an Injustice. There's a Justice Society of Evil. There's always going to be a pushback. So in doing so, they sort of offer up an alternative to this multinational by Eisner, but it's through a group that says it's doing it differently, that says that it's for the world, and yet their methods don't seem very different. I didn't think they had as big of a period on the page as multinational did, but I was wondering what you thought of that idea of a second body of, intellectuals, free thinkers, and it seemed like almost like an activist-based concept of multinational.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like anytime you have a group like that, there's always going to be a group that's either opposed to it or who thinks they can do it better. I feel like there's never gonna be one group that kind of reigns supreme amongst the people, because there's always going to be dissent, no matter what. That's just the nature of people. Unfortunately, it is what it is. I mean, if you look at our current political system, you look at, I mean, you can even just go and look at fandoms. You know what I mean? Star Wars versus Star Trek. I mean, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter what it is. You're gonna get people who think that what they believe is the right way, and there's like I said, there's always gonna be that dissenting group, and I feel like it's probably the best that way, because it almost pushes everybody. It's almost like a form of competition, you know. And sometimes, you know, that competition can be bad, but sometimes it can push them to reach for better goals, to find better ways to do things. So I think in general, I think it's a good thing. And when one party is running amok unchecked, that's never good.
It's true. So while I've done a lot of talking about like the story and the characters, I think the other thing to keep in mind is it's not like this is a novel. It's a graphic novel. It relies on the visual, which is one of those things that Eisner does so well with his storytelling. It's the expressions on characters' faces. It's the layout of the pages and panels and the way they blend into each other, and they train your eye to sort of follow what he's showing you. Because it's not like it's a brick of panels and you go left to right and then left to right. Sometimes the panel pulls you this way. Sometimes the action moves differently across the page.
That threw me off. That threw me off at times. That threw me off so much at times. But once I started getting like understanding kind of how his almost chaotic flow went, it was like I was kind of trying to brace myself for that from page to page, because you know, like I had just finished reading Watchmen like last week.
Okay.
And it is structured panels, 9 panels, like that's that boom, boom, boom. Yeah, that's the way you go. And this is the complete opposite of that. You know what I mean? It's just stuff on a page. Here you go. Figure it out. But the one thing that I did find that was very similar to Watchmen, which obviously I think Watchmen kind of got from this, is it's a graphic novel, but really it's a novel with pictures. Like the amount of just the amount of actual words in this book, I was like, there's a lot to read here, you know, and that's not a bad thing at all. But it's like, it reminded me of Watchmen, of V for Vendetta, those types of dialogue heavy graphic novels. And I kind of really dug that, because you don't get a lot of that these days. It's more about giant splash pages and things like that. That, you know, the art is great and the art tells a story, and that's fantastic. But you don't get a lot of these dialogue heavy books anymore.
I agree. It was something that, I mean, that's why I was really actually drawn to that whole Baxter memo. That's just, I mean, you know, it's not as common for someone to put that much text. And every once in a while,
that reminded me of Watchmen too, because like in between each chapter, there's like pages of stuff, whether it be like pages from a book or newspaper or whatever. Right. So like, it reminded me of that a lot.
I think the two people that I've seen the most do that recently would have to be Jonathan Hickman with his work on X-Men, and oh goodness, Johnson, I think is his last name, Philip Kennedy Johnson, for his Last God work. If you read any of the Last God books, there would be these like pages of like journal entries. We're talking type that big, like it was pulled out of a newspaper or a it's really, I mean, it's so thick, and it would just be these pages and pages of like the journal of some cleric for some religion, and it would just go on. And sometimes there would be printed songs, and very often I don't see that in books. What I did see about this book is something that, I only see in stuff like Alan Moore's, and more recently, the closest examples I have are Philip Kennedy Johnson, stuff from Hickman, where you're seeing that approach that I know some writers like I had a teacher who was really having fun writing a series and sharing with us. And it was like a whole series of letters between parents and a tennis coach and a kid and the parents, and just this, sort of fun way to share the story. But what Eisner does between that memo and these moments where characters are talking for like, it's got to be like 300-400 words. And they're like, so here's what I'm going to tell you. And it's all captured in those bubbles. But also along with the page layouts was like this intention of doing it different each time. Almost this desire of like, you've seen a page told one way. The one that sticks probably for the most for me, and if you want to glance to it while I'm describing it, page number 91 in the document for a Life on Another Planet, there's this gorgeous moment where he shows us a house. And then in showing us the house, he shows us like this bird's eye airplane view. And as you look at it, you can see that there's a pathway coming up the side, and then it comes over here. And then there's like a hedge that appears to be what would be surrounding the house. But then within that section are the panels of the story taking place inside the house. And I thought it was this really gorgeous layout. Like that stuck with me. And I made a note to myself, like, I'm going to talk about this because this was one of those pages where even when you know what he's doing and you can follow the layout, there's a party that's going. I have never seen anyone put a page together like that. I can't think of an example. I mean, maybe I've seen it by someone else, but the intention and the direction were never this clear. And when I looked at it, it just felt like something new I'd never seen before. I probably had about 10 of those moments throughout the book where it was like, who does that? And that was like, I really felt like he was saying, I've learned a lot since the Spirit, since the military manuals. And then now that I've been exploring this underground comic scene, which is where so much of this style seems to stem from, that contract, that he's saying, here's something I learned how to do, or this is what so many years of doing it one way has taught me how to do it another way. And that originality, the risk, it reminds me of when I heard once some comedians were talking and Seinfeld had gone off the air, and it was like a year or two later. And there's Jerry up doing stand-up again. And people were freaking out because they were like, he just did 40 minutes of brand new material. Are you kidding me? Who does, you know what I mean? It was like Bob Dylan going up and being like, I will not play Shelter from the Storm. I will not play any of my hits, which is something that a really great artist will do. They'll say, so I'm trying something new. Get used to it, And I felt that was something visually that really caught my attention because Contract with God introduced me to just how expressive he could be. Just how much he could show me between characters and pages, the rain and stuff like that, which was something Matt and I talked about. But that page right there and that example showed me a different way of looking at a page, a different way of telling a story. I mean, it made me ask, how do you write a script for that? How do you describe that for somebody that's going to do the art? Because that's the other thing. All of this, for the most part, is one guy.
That's wild to me.
To an artist, the artist receiving directions from a writer, or trying to interpret each other. He's got a single vision of it from both sides.
Yeah,
you were going to say that was what amazed you.
Yeah, it's wild just to think that it was essentially a one-man operation doing this, and just going back to like the style of that. Yeah, that first off, that page that you're talking about,
crazy,
is fantastic. And one of the things, like we talked about, how much dialogue he puts on a page, like, and these dialogue, it's like they're like mini paragraphs. But even though these bubbles take up a lot of room, there's still so much going on in the artwork that it's like, I don't understand how he fit all of it onto the page. You know what I mean? It's just like, how do you have all of these words plus all of this insane expressive artwork on here as well, telling, it's not just like one big splash page, it's like you got lots of stuff going on. It boggles my mind, and it makes me want to just start reading like as much of his stuff as I can now.
That's probably the one thing that I'm going to remember is the fact that each week I've had the chance to be part of this Will Eisner week has been learning something more, discovering something new, and also feeling the sense of like, I don't know enough. And I would love to read more, because it felt in those moments that he was saying, you know, I know what I'm doing. And also because I have always been the person not only writing the story, but designing the pages. It was like he almost knew what he could get away with and how much if he wanted to get away with it, he could accomplish in each page and each panel. You know, because we're looking at it and going, how do you know you can get that much dialogue in there? And there's got to be some part of him that's like, I knew this was going to be dialogue heavy. That's why I drew this part this way. And even then, it was still a risk, but it's this forethought, you know, this idea of being able to sort of predict what he's doing or have this like kind of grandmaster plan. Mm-hmm. I remember I got to meet Jack Katz, who is the person who, according to at least one graduate student who published a thesis paper on it, is technically the one who came up with the first graphic novel as an idea. He wrote The First Kingdom, and there's a series of letters between him and Will Eisner talking about, you know, this idea and how Jack suggests, I think I want to call it a graphic novel. I think I want to call it, you know, this and that. And how in doing so, you know, there's that idea that he's the first to do it. But also when I got the chance to talk to him, he said, I can see all this, you know, like he was working on like a 500-page book, and then he wrote another 500-page one. Wow. And now he's working on another like five. Yeah, Liam Sharp's doing a whole campaign with him on Twitter about it.
Oh, and that's cool.
It's called like The Unseen Jack Katz. And it was really interesting because he said he's always seen it from beginning to end in his mind. Like, he knows exactly how this story starts, exactly how it ends, and every day he's just working that way. And I wonder how much of that with Eisner, because as I'm looking through this, it feels like he was like, all right, you're going to tell this story. You're going to want to do it in this many pages. You're going to want this many chapters, you know, and they're going to each have this idea behind them. And something that John Hitchcock mentioned when we were talking was the idea of like, and Matt mentioned it too, is this idea of like balancing the weight of the page, trying to figure out how much the page and the reader can handle when it comes to what goes onto that page as far as and things like that. It really felt like he was still balancing the act. Like he was still very aware of everything he'd accomplished, but he was also taking huge risks. And then at the same time, showing us like, I know, don't worry, I can pull this off. Really. And you flip the page, you're like, son of a gun, he did it. He pulled it off. And from every moment after that, you know, you're almost looking for him to sort of like do it different again, push the boundary again, prove it again. And a couple of times, you know, I was surprised at how well I thought he pulled it off. You know, this idea of balancing the two against each other and sort of just showing a mastery. You know, it's kind of like if you're going to read a Stephen King, you know, you kind of know the guy's been around for a while, and he's going to do a lot of things really well, and he's going to make it look good in the process.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I was curious also, you know, what other takeaways, you know, stuck with you as far as the book, whether it's character, art, theme, content, timeliness, or maybe something that, you know, because we've been at this for almost an hour and we've kind of broken down a lot of good ideas. But, you know, it's like whenever I'm interviewing somebody for an episode, I always think of the question I didn't ask, you know, the topic that somebody would have loved if I brought up, because that would have been really cool. And I was just curious if there was any thoughts you had that you were like, I'll see if he brings these up, but, you know, I haven't yet. And this is your opportunity to maybe include them in the discussion in any way, shape, or form.
I think timeliness is definitely one, because this book, as I'm reading it, I'm like, this could literally be like, it's not, it was written in 1973, but this could be written right now. And none of it felt like it was set in, like, there might've been a couple of small things, but none of it really felt like it was set in the 70s.
Right. Maybe some style.
Yeah, some style. Yeah. It felt, I guess, timeless. I guess it would be the word to use, because I feel like it didn't matter when you're reading this. It feels like this is exactly what could be going on right now, no matter what era we're sitting in. And it got me thinking a lot about, well, what would we do if this kind of a thing happened? You know, how would this country, how would foreign countries react, and would they be able to coincide with one another to come up with some sort of plan, or would it just be a free for all to see who gets there first? And it really kind of opened up my mind to this thought of how this would all work out in a current time, and it's something I really hadn't ever thought about. You know, I've watched a lot of sci-fi, but that specifically isn't, you know, I watch them and then I just kind of leave, you know. But for some reason, this really has, and I've been, ever since I finished reading, I've been thinking about it. You know, it hasn't left my mind because of it. So it's incredible just how he's been able to kind of like penetrate my brain with all these concepts. It's fantastic. I absolutely loved it.
I love that you got to timeless, because while you were talking about timeliness, I was thinking about the fact that this could have been, you know, this could be something you were reading 10, 15, 20 years ago, and it'd probably feel as relevant as it does now. It addresses so many timeless themes, I guess would probably be the best example. But then I was curious about the fact, because I really appreciate that you brought it up, and it's worth adding. This isn't something that, or this is something that has been repeated. It hasn't been strictly told, this type of story, in just this book. Contact. I think there was the one with Charlie Sheen called like The Arrival.
The
and
Arrival,
a few others that suggest the idea of what would happen if we got a signal, and how would we respond. And I felt that those movies touched on some of the ideas, but movies, a limited amount of time, how much can you tell in the story? But trying to compare those to this book, I didn't feel like any of them got to the degree of complexity that I felt that he provides. And also, I felt like his ability to weave this cast of characters throughout it is something that if anyone could put even a tenth of that into a film project and put it on the screen, now the concept of it could be as equally timeless. You know, if you can set it with this idea of, this is the possibility, and these are the tensions that are always going to exist, countries vying for philosophies, because there's one other one that we didn't really get into, and we have the technology to talk more about it, which is the idea of them creating a whole new organism, which really seems to be at the crux of Blood's desire to resist them. Is nowhere is anyone willing to raise the moral question of, is what we are doing correct? Is it right? Is it justifiable for the things we say we want it to accomplish? Like, you're saying the ends justify the means, but do they really? Do the methods actually make up? And, you know, we're constantly facing ethical questions of things like cloning, designed or chemically engineered food products, meat, things like this. But the idea of creating new life has always been one of those cutting edge possibilities in science and even science fiction, going all the way back to a Frankenstein concept, bringing something to life that technically, or in the eyes of some, shouldn't be alive. And that's something that's suggested in this. And I feel like it's one of those things that keeps it equally timeless, is you're raising a moral issue of, what do we do when there's an opportunity, and who do we include in that discussion when we make a decision about it? Curious what you thought about that real quick.
I mean, they made 5 Jurassic Park movies that said you should not do this.
Thanks for bringing in Jurassic Park.
I mean, I definitely, I understand the scientific curiosity. You know, I'm a science guy at heart, so I understand that curiosity. I mean, I'm pretty sure I just read a story that they just cloned an endangered ferret. I think it was like a black ferret or whatever.
I believe it.
Yeah, which, okay, stuff like that. Okay. You know, it's on the endangered list, so that, you know, if you're doing stuff like that, can help to bring that population back. Okay, you know, but there's like when you start messing around with cross DNA or trying to bring back long dead species and things. Like, I don't know. It gets real hairy. And the idea that he brings up with the whole plant human thing, the whole problem with it is it's not a human being anymore. So how do you treat that being? You know, like, if all of a sudden we created this half plant, half human being, now let's say it has the ability to communicate and walk, will it actually be treated the way a human being is treated? I don't think so. Because people look at anything that's different and they don't like it. You know, that's unfortunately the way of the world. And another thing that I thought was interesting, kind of going back to when we were talking about just some of these other stories that have been told of this similar type, they always seem to not be able to stop before the finish line, if that makes sense. Like, they got to get to the aliens. You know what I mean? They got to show those. It has to be there. But this story doesn't go there. It pulls back and stops before we get that resolution, which I actually really loved about it. I thought it was a fantastic, like, because I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, so when are they going to get to the planet? Are we going to find out what's on this planet? What are we going to find out? And then we don't, and I'm just like, all right, I like that. I didn't think I would, but I really did. I don't know what your thoughts on that part were, but
I love the fact that it starts with a signal and a possibility, and that it leaves us with a possibility unresolved, with a question still remaining, and showing us how really this story is about us and about how we interpret things. And it was something Matt mentioned when I was talking with him, this idea of Eisner wants to show you the people that you're not paying attention to. Mm-hmm. At one point, we get the opportunity to have, I think it's Blood. Maybe it was Jonesy. I mix them up sometimes in moments in the story, because there's certain scenes where just for the moment, I feel like it's an everyman, which is what Blood, I think, offers up for a lot of people, is the everyman character. Yeah. You know, the, oh goodness, what's his name? Actor who plays Han Solo, who was really Harrison Ford, who was really great at doing the everyman character. But the idea of him sort of like leaning his arm up against the wall and looking down at people, and he's like, look at you all going. We might have discovered life on another planet, but there you are, getting dinner, making, you know, meals, or doing taxes, or paying bills, or going to work, because this stuff all might be happening. But what you're doing in your life actually has to happen. Like, you have to live every day. You have to eat, you know, do things to take care of yourself, perform a job, pay bills. Like, you still have to live. And there are all these people who are involved in this idea. But some people, like, I mean, I don't think I'm going to get that phone call that Blood gets, where it's like, yeah, we're going to need you again, buddy. They're not coming to ask me to go on one of these dangerous missions or anything like that. So my life, while it might be affected in ways eventually, when it comes to this story, I'm a passenger as much as I would be if someone was reporting it on the news and they were telling me about these events occurring. I'm a lower level character who's not playing one of the bigger parts in this story. But also, this story is as much about me as it is about anyone else, because all of these people in this story are talking about what's best for me and you and anybody else who lives on this planet, and how they're the ones who, for whatever reason, have the power and believe they have the authority to make decisions about that for you, for me. And they're doing it all on nothing more than speculation and interpretation. You know, this signal has come through. And what's interesting is, since this book's been published, we've had a few moments where there's been a signal or a hint of something. And boy, it stirred us up in a heartbeat, and the possibility of a yes or a no, or what it might mean. And this says, okay, what if there's a signal and people took it serious enough to start doing all the things they do in this story? And by the end of it, we're still left with that question. What was it?
Yeah.
What was the signal? And not knowing any of that, look at how much the possibility, the suggestion of it did throughout the entire scope of this story. It's an interesting idea behind the power of suggestion, behind power of possibility, behind how far we're willing to take a glimmer of something and use it to launch off in all these different directions. I thought it was a really interesting way to start a story. I had a teacher who was always like, I was told there's only two stories in the world. Person goes on a trip, stranger comes to town. And that, instead, this has been something that's been taken from a few different people who were claimed to have been the people who said it. And actually what they said was, no, there's all these different ideas, but those are the two that are most common used in. And I thought this was a different sort of approach to that. Yeah, a stranger comes to town, but the stranger is really just a signal. And it could be the same thing as if you set this story 100, 300 years ago and said, a comet flies through the air.
Yeah.
What happens? People interpret it to mean whatever they want it to be. And what you're left with is all the motivations behind what do we do about it, right? Like there's no point at which someone's like, hey, why don't we just wait to see what else they have to say? Hey, why don't
Yeah, like you said at the beginning, like it was such a short signal that just repeated that you didn't actually know what it was. And then just boom, they're like, okay, we're going. Right. Nobody tried to do like it is. I don't know. It was nuts to me that how quickly, but it's so believable how quickly people would rush into it. And that's the scary part about the world is that I feel like that is exactly how we would react. If something strong enough came to us like that. Yeah.
I think our tensions are high enough, that we could be that reactionary. And I also think that, some of the ideas he suggested, like communication through neutrinos, the fact that this story starts off with the concept behind the Voyager mission, which was our desire to send a message into space. And oh goodness, we had, what's his name? The spaceship of the imagination, whose name's totally escaping me right now. And I'm so disappointed. Very popular scientist. Someone out there is like, you idiot. I know exactly who he is. But he was part of that Voyager project, and this was written around that same time on the idea of we're sending stuff into space, but what do we expect to get back? And this was one idea, that this is a mission that's based on communication. That means life on another planet, and that means now we have actually like a reason to react and to do something, because it's not ever suggested that before this there was already a plan in place to visit another planet, visit Mars, visit anywhere else. But suddenly, because of this signal, all of that now needs to happen. It has to happen, which I think is a really interesting, like that whole reactionary idea, and the fact that if the tensions are right, if the need is enough, that's all it takes. Just enough spark to make us react and sort of just watch us go. You ever see The Fifth Element?
Oh yeah, I love that
right
movie.
There's that great moment where Gary Oldman's sort of I think he's yelling at oh goodness, the priest, and he's explaining like, you like order and this and that. He's like, but watch, I dropped this glass and all these little machines come running out, all this chaos and life occurs. And I always love that suggestion, that's actually what makes things happen. So I think that was a really interesting premise behind the story. And I thought it was probably a brilliant move to not give us that resolution, to leave us with one of those many unanswered questions, as you brought up. The idea that we, at the end of this book, we don't know what the signal is. We don't know what it means. And then when we possibly get a variation on the signal, we have a character who, I'm not spoiling this for anybody, you can read it yourself, who has made a decision to place themselves in a position where when the information comes that way, they've decided this is what you do about it. And that decision, I think, is such an interesting choice. Like, you know what? This is what you do. And just like Will Eisner and his years of telling stories, like once you've been around enough, once you've seen enough, once you have a good idea of how things can play out, it's not hard to choose how you're going to do things. what your choice is going to be and how you're going to set yourself up to be a part of that, which I thought was a really interesting choice too. Like, someone who's been through it, it's like, you know what? I don't trust any of you guys. I got all the reasons not to. And now that I'm going to, put myself in a position where I can do something about it, choice is out of your hands now. I'm the one making the decisions for you. Leave you with any interesting thoughts about, one character who's got that, control, but also seems to understand the responsibility of it and maybe is making the best choice.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't want to spoil too much of the ending.
Exactly. I know I'm tiptoeing around the pin needle here,
but yeah, the idea that this character just sets himself up to a point where he can make that decision, no matter which way it's gonna go. I found that fascinating, and I thought that it really brought an interesting, I guess you could say, conclusion to that character's arc. But I mean, it's ongoing. You know what I mean? It's not like he's dead. Right. So like anything that happens, he's still there. Making his decisions however he chooses, and who knows how long that will go on. And yeah, I'm trying not to say too much, but.
Well, the other thing that I can say without offering up a spoiler is, while he's there in that position for the moment, he's a temporary stopgap. Human beings live and die for the most unexpected reasons. A car crash. We see the concept of poisons and spy-like subterfuge. So if that's being introduced, and we know that this guy's there either for as long as he lives naturally or as long as he lives unnaturally. That's our little temporary respite, because once he's gone for whatever reason, well, who knows what can happen next. We can kind of get an idea of what he's going to do because of the story we've seen about him, but we know he's only going to be around for a certain period of time. And it's almost like, I don't know how much longer I can relax before I need to worry again. Which is an ominous feeling that it left me with. So that's why I was curious what your take was as well, because it left me with that sense of like, okay, in this story, the right guy is in the right position in my mind, because I'm okay with everything else that happened that he saw, and he's basing his decisions on what he knows and what he's seen. But at the same time, that doesn't mean I can relax, because we've all seen what can happen. And if he's not there to stop it or change it, we could all be in for a scary thing. That was,
you know what I loved is that, again, this is written almost 50 years ago. Eisner could have easily 20, 30 years later done a follow-up if he had wanted to.
Especially with the technology. I mean, he's talking about communication through neutrinos and some other ideas that are fairly far-fetched, but not outside of scientific scope at that time. Look at how much further we are along now with the electrons, cell phones, communication. I mean, just what we know about our universe compared to what we knew then.
Yeah. I mean, he passed in 2005, right?
I believe,
I think it was 2005. So, I mean, even if let's say 25 years later, you're talking 1998. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening then, you got the early years of the internet and things. So like, there could have been a lot more that you could have dove into in a follow-up. I don't know if I would have wanted one, and after reading it, would I have read it? Absolutely. I would have read it. But I kind of like, because like nowadays we live in a time where you gotta pump out sequels to things. It's just, that is the nature of the beast now.
It's true. It's how you prove your viability.
Yeah, exactly. So, but having a story like this that ends on this question, not get a follow-up of any sort, I love that wholeheartedly. It's because it allows you to just have these types of conversations and just let your mind just wander in all the insanity that could be.
And like that example I was using from that West Wing story, the idea of how long can that artist hold your attention? Well, we're still thinking about the story after we've closed the book and we've finished it. I'd say that's a testament to what his desire as an artist was, to keep your attention through it and then leave you wondering afterwards. Mm-hmm. And I almost feel like if he was able to feel confident and successful in that, based on how you and I are describing it and how his response must have been originally and how it has been over the years, I imagine that to an extent, sure, there would be the temptation to write the sequel, but there's also the recognition that if you paint the Sistine Chapel, you don't paint the Sistine Chapel again. You did that. Like you've done that. You don't need to do it again. You don't have to prove anything. And unless there was a reason throughout it that you found yourself going, okay, something has changed in the world where this story is no longer timeless, then maybe you consider it because you now want to recapture that. But if the story stays timeless, if it's still doing everything you wanted it to do, you don't change it. And you recognize the fact that it did what it was supposed to do. And upon the next reading, it still does that. So I think I would probably want to hedge on that side of his reason for not doing it is because there wasn't a need before he passed, and I don't think there's still a need now. I feel like this story still leaves us with all the questions we want, all the mystery, and it keeps it that sort of timeless idea that you suggested.
Absolutely.
Man, I love the fact that you were able to take the time to sit down with me about this. I had no expectations beyond talking with someone else who loves to talk about great comics, great art, great stories. And that when you picked this book and I read it, I simply knew we're going to have a great conversation. And by the end of it, I'm going to love everything we talked about, man. So thank you for celebrating Will Eisner Week with me and coming on the show. And do you want to go ahead and let anybody know who hasn't seen you before or heard me reference you with sort of reverent praise on Spinner Rack and other stuff like that? Because Josh has been an amazing editor-in-chief and also an amazing sound editor for me. But someone else who hasn't met you yet through me might be going, I wouldn't mind following up with this guy. I might have some questions, some thoughts, anything, anywhere you want to let people know to follow up if they want to continue our conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I want to say thank you for having me on. This was a blast. I had a great time, and just getting a chance to read something like this was fantastic. But you guys can find me on Twitter at JP Raynor. It's JPRAYNOR. I also have, as he said, I am the editor-in-chief of DC Comics News. So you can always find me there at DC Comics News on all the social medias. I also run a movie review site called Merc with a Movie Blog at Movieblog Merc on Twitter. So check me out there. I'm all over the place.
And for me, I've talked about myself enough. The whole point of this conversation was to have on Josh, which was something I feel we accomplished to a plum. And man, if I'm going to kick off my weekend anyway, it's going to be this conversation we're having on a Friday night about an awesome book and a story I'm still thinking about. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks for joining us. And Josh told you all the ways to find him. So I know you're going to want to follow up with him. Don't be shy. He's out there. He's a good guy. He listens. He talks. Look at that smile. How do you not trust that?
Yeah.
Huh? Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
Man. Thank you.
All right.